And as you think about, I mean, coming off of that and thinking about, Temple Emanu-El has a wonderful green team that we've worked with for a really long time, and you all have been a really great partner. And so thinking about, I mean, this congregation does really good at getting its hands dirty to do the work. And so what is the work that you're excited about now and moving forward?
Yeah. Thanks, Corey. Well, I mean, we'll start by saying that we have lots of folks here who have the best intentions, and yet, best intentions need to be led. Sure. And so GIPL has been invaluable to help us figure out where are all our good intentions, how do we focus them. Look, I think we're doing a good job, and there's still lots more that we can and ought to be doing. There's been a real attempt to do our best to green the building, and that includes changing out, I think, hundreds of light bulbs to the right ones. There's a recycling program here, which we've done a good job with, and there's lots of folks involved with that. We have Garden Isaiah, which as you drive in, there's this gorgeous garden.
Yeah, would you talk a little bit about that? Because
Sure.
I think it's one of the remarkable things that y'all do here.
Yeah. So Garden Isaiah is named after the prophet Isaiah, and the supplemental scriptural reading, the Haftorah reading that we do on high holidays, or one of them is from the prophet Isaiah, who is addressing Jews who are at Yom Kippur, right? Speaking with the voice of God, for whatever that is worth or means. And Isaiah says, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Hey Jews, if there are hungry people who you're not trying to help in your neighborhood, and people who are naked who need clothing in your cities who you're not trying to help, and that type of thing, and you don't bother with all of this. Don't bother with your fasting, with your praying. I don't want your prayers." This is the words of Isaiah. Doing the work. Your prayers are not wanted. And that's a pretty stark message. And what it does is it helps us sort of face the hypocrisy that we might see in our prayers. Like, are these things really important to us? We say they are. And as a group, as a community, and there's lots of Jews in synagogues on high holidays, so we're saying these words together in unison. Well, this is supposed to be God's response to these words. Wonderful that you have these aspirations and you're saying these words. You got to go do something about it. So as a result of that, there was a group of congregants here at Temple Emanu-El, and maybe 20 years ago, I might be off a little bit with the actual year, but started this wonderful garden, which has grown a few times in those decades. And every Sunday morning, a group of congregants come and they plant and they work on the garden. They harvest, to the extent that something like 3,000 pounds a year of fresh produce gets taken from the ground, and now we have trees involved, so taken off the trees, and then taken down to some of our local community partners, the CAC Community Assistance Center, Mary Hall Freedom House, the local food bank. So there are recipients of this fresh produce that we make. The idea when we started the green team efforts is we really wanted to make Temple Emanu-El an exemplar, and to do the very best that we could with this place. And then step two was, hey, 740 plus congregant families here at Temple Emanu-El, a couple thousand people. This is what your synagogue is doing and trying to do. Can we be helpful to you and your household to make your homes greener? Now, we all know that the problems of the environmental world are not fixed with turning lights on and off, but we also know that there's a consciousness that comes with us. And if we're conscious about leaving the water running while we're brushing our teeth, right, or the lights or the recycling, that then starts to expand, like expanding concentric circles, like a pebble in a still pond. Well, what's the next thing? And then my friends see, and I see my friends, and oh, now there's something that's coming before the voting block. And we have a couple different candidates who are running, and one of them is on board with what have become our priorities religiously and socially, and what we hope for our children, and frankly, we all know that there's a very serious danger that I can't dwell on, because I can't live my life every day like that, but when I do dwell on it, I know and we know that there's serious things that, there's choices that are being made, right? What we do and what we don't do. And doing nothing is a choice. Yeah. So all of these little things help develop our consciousness. It's helpful that there is a religious mandate for Jews that we are supposed to have this type of consciousness. And I know that there are good people of every faith, and pastors and imams and priests and ministers and rabbis and who feel this way. And so what I appreciate about the work that you're doing, you and Gipple, is that you're helping to bring what we all know is our priority to the surface. Because we're bombarded with all sorts of things. Many of them very good things, right? So how do we keep the environment and our obligation to the environment as individuals and society at the forefront of our consciousness? And the answer is we need reminders. So kol hakavod, more power to you, and thank you for doing it.
Oh, thank you. I mean, well, you brought up something that I kind of want to tease out and ask you about, which is kind of the personal piece, in the most micro scale, that looks like turning off the water faucet, turning off the light, which some people might say doesn't make that big of a difference. And I think, for me and for many others, it helps to instill what I would call a spiritual discipline, but that reminder of being in tune with your choices, and that doing the right thing, whether it quote unquote makes a difference or not, is part of being in tune with what you're supposed to do as a living being. But then also you zoomed out to and then that makes you care about the community and the macro sort of policy stuff. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the importance of people doing both, the spiritual discipline yourself, your own individual actions, and also I got to care about the systems.
Yeah. I'm pausing because I know that I personally am not doing everything that I know I need to be doing, and so that's a worthwhile realization. So the way that Jews and Judaism approach text in general is that, there's a wide range, but the commonalities are we're supposed to see ourselves in the text. That the text isn't just a story. It's not Harry Potter, which is a great story with a great moral message, right? That there is something either directly divine or divine inspired about it, depending where you fall on the proverbial spectrum. So our central story as Jews, I forgot to tell you about Thanksgiving and Sukkot.
Well, we're going to come back.
We'll come back to it. Cool.
We'll come back.
That'd be a
after.
good thing to end with.
All
right. So our central story is the Exodus story, right? That's where we believe the Jews became a nation, got our start. And for everyone's familiar with it, right? Jews were enslaved for 400 plus years in Egypt. That's longer than America's been a country. God, through Moses, brings through the 10 plagues. And after that 10th plague, finally Pharaoh says to the Israelite people, go on, get out of here. So 3 days of walking, and we have to leave very quickly. So quickly, we don't even have time for the bread to rise, which is why we have to eat matzah at Passover. Some people love matzah, not me. They call it the bread of affliction for a reason, okay? So, but as the story goes, 3 days after walking, we come to the Sea of Reeds. It's an ocean. And right at this time, Pharaoh changes his mind again. And to extract revenge for the 10th plague and to save face and all sorts of reasons, Pharaoh sends the most powerful army in the known world after the Jews. And the Midrash, sort of the stories between the stories, have it that we could see the dust and hear the horses from the chariots way before we actually saw any people. And so here you've got this people who have come out of slavery. You've got, again, that proverbial kid in each hand. And time is not on our side, right? You've got this army charging down at us. Picture everybody lined up against the water, right? Kind of getting as far away as you can. So there's nowhere to to run to, there's nowhere to hide, and you've got this dire situation coming at you. So now we go to the text, all right? The text itself, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but the Israelite people say to Moses, Moses, did you take us out of Egypt just to bury us in the desert? Weren't there graves enough for us in Egypt? It's sarcastic or sardonic humor, not humor. Whatever it is, right? It's sarcasm. Hey, you didn't have to bring us out here to die. We could have died there. Moses then says to them something very rabbinic, which is you have to have faith and pray. And then he turns to God, and I am paraphrasing here, and says to God, right? Yeah. What do I do? And God's response to Moses is, and again, we're back to text here, almost like we're playful. Don't just stand there. Tell the people to move forward. Okay, cut scene. Now, enter Midrash again, story between the story, about one particular individual whose name is Nachshon ben Amidav, a real person, meaning he's listed in a couple of the genealogies as a prince of one of the tribes. So he's not just a schlump, he's a somebody, okay? But the story is that he sees everybody against the water. Pharaoh's army's charging down, time's not on our side, and he decides he's got to do something. So what does he do? He takes a step into the water. Now, what's important here is, one, he decides to act. He decides to take the step, and everybody sees him because they're all lined up on the water. He takes another step in, and a couple people file in behind him. Another step, more people file into the water behind him. You can kind of picture like a triangle, right? Another step, to the point where he is up to his nose right here, and the whole nation of Israel, all the Israelites are in the water trying, okay? And at that point, and only that point, God splits the sea. In other words, you can look at this as through our intentions and our actions of challenging the reality in front of us, that we force the miracle. Okay? And there's a theology to this. So the environment and our environmental concerns, I and many of us look at as a parallel to this. Okay? We see the dust in the distance. You can hear the thunder of the horse hooves coming. Yeah. Time is not on our side. Doing nothing is a choice, and it's going to lead to a very unpleasant something. And so now we get to the brushing of the teeth with the water off piece. And we tell this story to our bar and bat mitzvah kids sometimes, who have that particular Torah portion. And we say, look, the things that you do, especially the things that you do and you're conscious and then you talk about and show, you could be that Nachshon. You could be the one taking that first step in. But maybe you're not the first step. Maybe you're the people coming right behind Nachshon, or behind them, or behind them. We're all looking for people to follow, to do the right thing, to make a choice. And if enough people are consciously doing those micro things and it enters their consciousness, well, that leads to bigger and bigger things. First of all, more people in the proverbial water, right? And now we're not talking about turning off the water when you're brushing your teeth. Now we're talking about legal change, business change, institutional change, societal change, world change. The question that we all ask is, can we get into the water? Can we be focused enough before that army comes charging down upon us? And there's a partnership, there's a faith that's involved in this. It's not so much a faith in God, it's a faith in each other, right? That we know enough, that we know what we need to do, that we can look at each other. And that's why these conversations, I'm very serious, this is not for the camera, right? That's why these conversations are so helpful, right? We can inspire each other, right? We can inspire the folks who are here, okay? And by doing this, we know that we're not alone walking into the water. We're either following or we have people who are watching us. So when that bat or bat mitzvah stands up there and talks about, hey, I want everybody to turn off the water while they're brushing their teeth, okay, so that's 300 gallons of water that we're saving a year, times the 200 people in the room, times their family, etc. I mean, this really quickly can make a big difference, but the vision and the religious vision is one that is very, very helpful for people who religion is central to their mindset.
Get your feet wet and force the miracle.
Get it.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
get in
huge.
the water.
Yeah, that's huge. I want to invite you to circle back to Thanksgiving and Sukkot, and then I've got one final question for you.
Great, super. So and people can fact check this. I'm not going to stand behind it because I have not fact checked it, but as I've been told, well, some of it you can fact check. So
as legend says.
Yes. So the original pilgrims who left the European shores, for the most part, were very religious people. Obadiah, Zebediah, right? And they looked at this Exodus story as a parallel of their own story. Just like the Jews were persecuted by Pharaoh for their religious reasons, they too are being persecuted by Pharaoh King George. And they were going to get into these rickety boats and go across the Bamidbar, the desert wasteland of the Atlantic Ocean, in hopes that they would find their promised land, which they did, and they eventually called it America. So as the story goes, when those pilgrims were after their first successful harvest, and we all know the myth of sharing the food with the Native Americans, and it's all lovely and kumbaya. I hope it's true. But as the story goes, when they were looking to name this holiday of their harvest and the sharing and the thanks, they looked at the Old Testament, okay? And one of the names of the festival of booths is Hag HaHodeah, the day of thanksgiving. And so that's how the name eventually becomes Thanksgiving for this holiday, because they're basing it on a biblical precedent of Hag HaHodeah, right? A day of thanks where we are supposed to not just be thankful for our bounty, but invite in guests, and that's also part of Sukkot. You're supposed to invite friends. You're supposed to invite guests. And conceptually, not just living guests, guests who have passed, and bring their message and their memory into the sukkah. So sukkahs are often decorated with not just harvest fruits, and around these parts it's gourds and pumpkins and that type of thing, but pictures of family members present and who have passed away, and sometimes symbolic images of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, of which we get so much of our religious inspiration from.
I lied. I'm going to ask you two questions because you opened it up a little bit, the sort of inviting people in, and I didn't want to lose, we've talked about Judaism, we've talked about the congregation specifically looking towards the community, and I think going even further, part of Gippl's mission is this interfaith piece. And I know that you've been in a couple of different faith traditions growing up and have experienced a lot of that. I know interfaith work and dialogue is a really important part of the community here and your work in the community. And so I just wanted to ask, what's the importance of the interfaith piece of the work and looking towards doing justice work and caring for the planet?
Yeah, it's essential. So clearly, in my mind, everybody has to start with themselves, meaning myself, yourself, and then we move to our next circle of influence, right? Family and immediate friends, and then community, faith community. But none of us are siloed, right? You have the old maxim of, the folks in the rowboat, and somebody's drilling the hole under their seat, and somebody says, "Hey, you can't drill a hole," and the person says, "Why? It's under my seat." Right? We're all in that boat. So we've got some really nice interfaith partnerships that we have here, and more that are developing. In particular, St. Luke's Presbyterian Church with Pastor David Lower, the Istanbul Cultural Center. We've got a nice relationship with them, and some others. And the idea is to really see each other, find commonalities that we can work with together, and in doing so, it's imagine lots of metaphors: a bridge, hands extending to one another, vines intertwining, right? Clearly we can be stronger together, and we may each approach some of these moral and political existential issues from a slightly different perspective, but clearly it behooves everybody to find commonalities and allies to forward the work. When we talk about the Jewish mission of Tikkun Olam, we're not saying we're the only ones who have it. We're not saying nobody else has it. We're just saying we have it, right? You know, I've got 3 kids. My kids are very different from each other. My wife and I, she's got a part of this, right? We have 3 kids together. Each of them are amazing. They're very different from each other. But my love for one does not preclude at all my eternal love for each of the others. And that's how we Jews look at God, right? We have a special relationship with God, we believe, but we believe that God has special relationships with lots of people and peoples and religions. So what a wonderful opportunity for good people of lots of faiths to find commonalities to move that proverbial needle to Tikkun Olam, right? To take us from where we are to where we know not just we ought to be, but we have to be. And the environment is clearly a big piece of that.
Plenty of water for everybody to get in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big ocean.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a big ocean.
Well, my last question, and thank you again just for taking the time,
Yeah.
but you mentioned joy and Sabbath and rest kind of throughout as themes, and I think, my last question kind of revolves around the work of doing justice in the world, whether it's on environment or any other issues, quite hard. It's a difficult world to be alive in. There's a lot of hoofs beating, a lot of dust in the air, to use the metaphor. And so what would you say to folks who want to continue the work, and make sure that we do the work to be resilient, to keep showing up, to keep doing that work even though it feels helpless at times, and also how to balance what is hard work with what is clearly these really important things that come up in these holy stories of joy and Sabbath in the face and even as resistance to some of these other things going on?
Yeah. Wow, boy, such a good question. There's a collection of, we'll call it wisdom literature from the big rabbis who lived around the year 0, called Pirkei Avot, which means the wisdom of our fathers. And there's one series which I think the rabbi who quotes is Rabbi Tarfon, who's from the Talmud, our oral tradition, which says that let me just try and get the exact quote in my mind, that the work, we are not free to desist from the work, but we're also not free to complete it, right? In other words, we, in American society, if we're not seeing sort of the end game of our efforts, a lot of times we're very hesitant to get involved. And what this piece of wisdom literature reminds us of is that, hey, this is a long game, right? And we all have to be a part of it, but we're not going to see the end. We may be setting it up for the next people to come behind us, and those next people may be next week, maybe next year, maybe the next generation, right? But we are obligated, each of us, to do that proverbial work. My advice for folks to, based on your question, would be a very practical one, and that is, don't stay siloed, right? It's very hard to do this work in isolation, and even though it takes some effort to connect with others who are doing the work, that effort, is going to be the difference between longevity and not. We call it accountability sometimes, or partners, or partnerships. Finding a community who's doing this work, finding an organization who's doing this work, and getting very, very involved. And sometimes the involvement is with time, and sometimes it's with effort, and sometimes it's with financial resources, right? But that's how all of this is going to happen. And remember that, we are commanded to feel the joy, right? Even when things around us are somewhat topsy-turvy, right? If we're just in code red all the time, we're going to be circling a drain, right? We have to have this spiritual fortitude of allowing ourselves to be revitalized by our mission and the people around us in those times of joy, so that we can do that hard work when that hard work comes up. So there is a balance. We just have to be very careful that our balance isn't do nothing, right? As opposed to do something, do a lot, right? But also make sure that you're not totally obsessed with just that, or else you won't be able to, walk through the night.
Yeah, seek rest, seek joy, to live, and to be able to show up and do the work and do it better, do it longer. Yeah.
Amen.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it.